Okay, hello and good morning. I'm very delighted to have you here in our today's session. So today we are going to have our preliminary discussion about tradition and individual talent by Thomas Stearns Eliot, or T.S. Eliot that we know. T.S. Eliot in this text, actually, he talks about the tradition, and also he said that how tradition can help an individual to improve or to nurture his talent. And also he talks about several other important issues, and also some of the things actually he introduced for the first time in the, you can say, in the literary criticism. So before we jump to the textual discussion, I would like to just shed some light on these. I would say some of the important you can say the register, or some of the important words that will help us to understand the text. So these are the four that actually we should have a little bit of idea about it. So the first important term is autotelic text. Though it is not mentioned in the text, but it will help us to understand it. So that's why I have put it here. And the second term that we will focus on, that is theory of impersonality, and then objective correlative. And the last one is dissociation of sensibility and unification of sensibility. Now, let's see what is autotelic text. Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen?
Yes, sir.
Just wait.
Yes, sir.
Here it is. Now, autotelic text, just if I want to say it very simply, that autotelic, auto, you mean something which is automatic. Telic means that will tell you something automatically. So the autotelic text, this idea actually, it was introduced by the new critics, and T.S. Eliot himself, he was a part of this new criticism, this movement, which started in early 1930s, especially in USA. So the new critical notion of autotelic text as self-contained or independent of the author, genre, or historical context was associated with Arnold's insistence on objectivity and Eliot's on impersonality. Now, if you can recall that while actually we were discussing Matthew Arnold's The Study of Poetry, there we discussed that how actually he wanted to have objectivity. He said that we cannot have any historical context and we can have any personal context in the poetry, so that it will turn into something which is very objective. You remember that we talked about historical and also the historical fallacy and the personal fallacy. Remember that we discussed these two terms while actually discussed the Matthew Arnold's The Study of Poetry. So similar thing here, you can also see that when somebody writes a poem, then in that poem he cannot have his personal feeling, he cannot infuse into that poem, and also we shouldn't consider it under any specific genre or historical context. So we cannot bring these things to just, that means a text is, it is completely something which is automatic. So whether it is a poem or whether it is a novel, it doesn't matter. Genre is not, it doesn't matter. We have to just consider the text itself, nothing else. And also, we don't care about the author who wrote it. We just care about the text. Also, we don't care about the historical background of the text. We only care about the text itself. So you see, the text is self-contained and it is independent of all these factors. It doesn't care about author, doesn't care about genre, doesn't care about historical context. Then we call a text that is autotelic. And our T.S. Eliot, actually, he will also support a text in most cases in this way, so that the text can be very much objective. You understand now what is autotelic text, right?
Yes, sir.
Is it clear?
Yes, sir. Clear, sir.
Okay. Now, then we'll jump to theory of impersonality. Now, theory of impersonality, it says that the personal experiences are not to be associated with the theme of the poetic composition, but rather to be kept identical and separate from it. So if you just take the idea of autotelic text, that in the autotelic text, we cannot have the personal emotion or the autobiographical element of the poet or the writer. We shouldn't consider it. So the theory of impersonality the same. Individually, we are discussing what is theory of impersonality, but it is a part of the autotelic text. So it says that personal experiences, that means the personal experiences of a writer or of a poet, it must not be associated with the theme of the poetic composition, but rather to be kept identical and separate from it. So your personal experience as a poet, you must keep it separate, identical, and you must not infuse your personal experience, personal emotion into the poem. So it must be separated. That is theory of impersonality. And as of this reason, he even regards two constituents of composing the poetry: the personal elements, the feelings and emotions of the poet, and the other one being the impersonal element, which is the tradition or the accumulated knowledge, information, and wisdom acquired from the past by the poet. So, two things. One is the poet's personal emotion, his personal feelings, and the other one is, which is impersonal element, that is tradition. Tradition means the accumulated knowledge or information, wisdom that is acquired from the past by the poet. That means, for example, if we talk about from our literature, we talk about Tagore or Nazrul or we can say Shatyendranath or Jivanananda. So you see all these poets, I mean, they are from the past. So if I want to write something in Bangla, then what I have to do, I have to take experiences from those traditions. So my knowledge actually is the accumulation of all the knowledge that I have gathered from the past. So as a poet, I'm not someone who is alone. So I have taken my experiences from the past and then I'm using those experiences to write my own poems. But at the same time, when actually I'm doing it, I'm not infusing into the poem my personal emotions and feelings. Now, next, briefly, this theory of personality, is it clear to you, or do you need any more explanation? Is that clear to you, the theory of personality? I just explained it very briefly.
I need more clarification.
Okay, I'll just make it very simple in this way. So theory of personality means in the poem, your personal feelings and emotion, it must not be there. Now, whether you support it or not, that's a different case. For example, personally, if you ask me, sir, do you believe that? Personally, I don't believe that. Because I'm writing the poem, then how is it possible that I will keep my personal feelings from my creation? Do you get my point, what I'm saying?
Yes, sir.
T.S. Eliot is saying that as a reader or even as a writer, we must not be influenced by a personal emotion, personal feelings. So we have to keep poetry as something which is a separate entity. So personal feelings and emotions must not be infused into it, or must not be mingled with the text. But my personal opinion is that it is impossible in a sense, because without our emotion and feelings, we are nothing. So whatever actually you want to write, knowingly or unknowingly, your personal emotions and feelings will be there, because that is my creation. So definitely my feelings and experiences will be there, which is quite natural. But he actually tried to suggest in that way that we shouldn't have that thing, I mean, in the poem. So that was his opinion. Now the next term we will be discussing, that is objective correlative. Now what is objective correlative? So objective means something which is not personal, so you can understand it. And also it is related with object. And correlate means you will correlate, that is, you will relate something with an object. So correlate, objective, correlative, if I want to explain it just from the title or from this phrase, for our simple understanding, we can say that to relate something with the object. That means to relate our emotion with an object. That is objective correlative. That means if we want to express our emotion or express our experience or ideas, then we need an object, and depending on the object, then we will express our emotion. So that is objective correlative. That means to relate to our emotion, we need an object. To relate to our action, to relate to our work, we need an object. So here you see, objective correlative is a term popularized by T.S. Eliot in his essay on Hamlet and his problems. So this is another essay written by T.S. Eliot. It is also very famous, Hamlet and his problems. And there he's saying that to refer to an image, action, or situation, usually a pattern of images or actions or situations that somehow evokes a particular emotion from the reader without stating what that emotion should be. So you see, it's referred to an image, an action, or situation. This action, situation, or image, that is the object. And we will use that action or emotion or situation to evoke a particular kind of emotion from the reader without stating what that emotion should be. That means we are not going to talk about it, but we will try to evoke the emotion from the reader. I will give you an example, and always remember that according to this objective correlative, this idea that was, it was established by T.S. Eliot. According to him, you can see it's not only a single image, it's not only a single action, or it's not only a single situation. We can say it's a combination of images, combination of actions, and combination of situations that will help us to evoke a particular emotion. Okay, so I can give you an example. You will tell me, I will ask you this. For example, I'm mentioning something, the color red, and then I'm mentioning, for example, another thing that is grave. So color red, grave, or graveyard, coffin. So when I say that color red, coffin, graveyard, so what kind of emotion actually it comes to you? How do you feel?
Death.
Death.
Yes, you see, death itself, it's a noun, but emotion, absolutely you're right, death, we can say. But what kind of emotion actually it evokes? This death, what kind of emotion it evokes? Huh? Sorry?
Fear or sorrow?
Yeah, fear or sorrow. But usually we become very sad, right? So it's a sad kind of emotion. We become very sorrowful actually when we hear this kind of thing, the red or coffin or graveyard. So automatically we become very sad. So you see, this emotion of sadness or this sorrowfulness, actually, it has been evoked by the use of all these three different kinds of images. Understood?
Yes, sir.
So for a particular emotion that now we call it sadness. So for that particular emotion, we need all these three different images or actions or situations so that it will help us to feel the emotion, and that we call sadness. So this is called objective correlative. So we need a chain of images or a combination of images, actions, or situations to evoke a single emotion or a particular emotion, just like sadness. Is that clear? Objective correlative. Yes, is that clear to you, all of you?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's fine. Then we'll not go for it for further analysis. Then we'll jump to our next term, that is disassociation of sensibility and unification of sensibility. Now, another of the popular cliche of Eliot is the phrase dissociation of sensibility and its opposite, unification of sensibility. The phrase was first introduced by Eliot in his essay, The Metaphysical Quest. This is another essay, just like Tradition and Individual Talent. This is another essay, Metaphysical Quest, of the early 17th century. Now, by unification of sensibility, T.S. Eliot means a fusion of thought and feeling, or a recreation of thought into feeling, or you can say a direct sensuous apprehension of thought. Such fusion of thought and feeling is essential for good poetry. This poetry suffers when there is a disassociation of sensibility, that is, the poet is unable to feel his thoughts. Eliot finds such unification of sensibility in the metaphysical poets and regrets that a dissociation of sensibility set in the late 17th century, there was a split between thought and feeling, and we have not yet recovered from this dissociation. The influence of Dryden and Milton has been particularly harmful in this respect. So you see, he is admiring metaphysical poets like John Donne, Andrew Marvell, this kind of poets. Actually, he's admiring them. Why? Because they could use this idea, or they have this capacity to unify the sensibility, or to have this unification of sensibility in their poetry. That is a fusion of thought and feeling. That means you're thinking about something and you can relate your feeling with that thought and feeling. Then you can put them together. Or you can say a recreation of thought into feeling. Now, if you just take an example, it sounds a little bit scientific. So if you take the example of any of the poems by John Donne, then you will find that he has used different kinds of instruments sometimes, geometrical, instruments that is used for mathematics or geometry. So he used those like compass. So he used those examples or used those things to express his emotion. So he was thinking about something and he has infused his feeling or emotion into that particular thing. So in this way, actually, he has unified his thought, whatever he was thinking, and he unified his feeling with that thought. But he is saying that Dryden and Milton, they actually failed to do that because their language was very lofty, their ideas were very lofty or very noble, very high. But thing is that they couldn't, evoke the emotion of the readers the way the metaphysical poets could evoke the emotion of the readers by this unification of sensibility. So when there is thought and feelings, they are not put together in the poems, then we call it dissociation of sensibility. Now, here actually he has explained it, and this is an excerpt from the Metaphysical Poets by T.S. Eliot, where he says, Tennyson and Browning are poets, and they think, but they do not feel their thought as immediately as the odor of a rose. So he's saying that Tennyson and Browning are poets, and they can think, but they do not feel their thought as immediately as the odor of a rose. So you see, when you see a rose and when you take the rose, you can get the odor then and there. But he's saying that Tennyson and Browning, it's not like that. That means they are rose, but they don't have any smell. Because when you read their poem, you can get their thought, but you don't feel anything. You don't get the feeling. You don't get emotional. You don't get the feeling out of it. That means you don't feel it. You just only read it and you think, but you don't feel anything. Reading Tennyson and Browning. That is his criticism of these two poets. A thought to Donne was an experience, but when he's talking about Donne, you see, he's very positive. He's saying that it modified his sensibility. When a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its words, it is constantly amalgamating disparate experiences. The ordinary man's experience is chaotic, irregular, fragmentary. So here, you see, he's saying that ordinary man, they only think, and their thinking process is very much chaotic. They cannot put things together. But when actually he was talking about Donne, he says, but you see, John Donne, he could modify his sensibility. That means he could use his feeling, and at the same time he could put his thought together. So the amalgamation of disparate experiences, of different kinds of experiences, two opposite kind of experiences. Poet like John Donne, they could put them together, and that's why they're great poets, according to T.S. Eliot, because these amalgamating disparate experiences means different kinds of experiences. They are completely opposite, strange, unfamiliar to each other. But he put those things, unfamiliar stuff, or stranger stuffs together and made them one. So that's why he is, as a poet, John Donne and all the metaphysical poets, they are successful. Okay. All right. So was it clear to you? The dissociation of sensibility and unification of sensibility?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so if you have any question regarding this, you can answer now. Do you have any question about dissociation of sensibility or unification of sensibility? Any question?
No, sir, I don't have any.
All right, now we'll talk about this tradition and individual talent. Now, T.S. Eliot, he wrote this, he published this in 1919, and he was an editor of a magazine. The name of the magazine is Egoist. And he published this, this tradition, individual talent, in 1919, I mean, in this magazine. This essay described by David Lodge is a very famous critic, and he says that the most celebrated critical essay in the English of the 20th century. Because you see, the new criticism or the new critic, because the new criticism movement, the literary movement, actually, it was very much influenced by this essay, this tradition and individual talent, and they borrowed lots of ideas from this. So that's why actually you can see it influenced, the critics, and also it influenced the writers as well later on. So traditional individual talent it can be classified in this way. You can see the first part of these traditional individual talent, it talks about tradition. So he will define what is tradition, and also he will talk about its importance in the first part. In the second part, he exemplifies his theory of depersonalization and poetry. So he will talk about depersonalization, or you can say the theory of impersonality. That means when you don't have the personality, then you call it depersonalization. So depersonalization and poetry. And in the last part, he will conclude the debate by saying that the poet's sense of tradition and the impersonality of poetry are complementary things. So tradition and impersonality, they are complementary. That means they will help each other to create great literature, or to create, good poetry, or great poetry, you can say. So we'll concentrate on the first part of the tradition and individual talent. So can you see it on the screen?
Yes, sir.
I don't hear
Yes,
from anybody else. Okay, that's great. Now, in the first part, you see, in English literature and criticism, we rarely come across passages illustrative of the right use due emphasis on the term tradition. From time to time, we apply the word in expressing our grief for its absence. We cannot make a reference to the tradition or to a tradition. At most, we use the adjective in saying that the poetry of so-and-so is tradition, or even to tradition. The word appears rarely, and when it does appear, it is used as a phrase of censure. Now, T.S. Eliot, actually, it's a kind of objection, you can say. His observation, rather, I should say, not an objection, but his observation or his analysis is that the tradition, actually, it is not found these days in English literature. And the term, in most cases, actually, we are using it to censure. That means tradition as a term, it has become something which is pejorative, or you can say derogative, or derogatory. Derogatory means something people, they don't like it anymore. So, for example, when we say, oh, he's very traditional, that means he's very old, he's not modern, just like this. So he's also saying that we are using tradition, this word, in a very negative way. But he sees that the tradition is something which will help us to constitute or to construct the great literature, and we are the part of the tradition. So that is his idea. Now, in the next slide, you can see, in English criticism, according to Eliot, we have a deplorable lack of that critical insight which views a particular literary work or a writer in the context of a wider literary tradition. Now, he is saying that in our English criticism, there is a problem, and it's a lack. And what is that lacking? He's saying that when we try to criticize a particular literary work, we don't consider that work, from a broader perspective. That means we don't take all other works together from the past. That means we don't set a tradition of work, and we don't compare a work with that tradition. So that is our problem. The English literary critic doesn't give due weight and consideration to tradition in evaluating the writers of the past and in appreciating the poets of the present. He uses tradition in a derogatory sense. So you see, what is he saying? That the critic doesn't give due weight and consideration to tradition in evaluating the writers of the past. That means when we try to evaluate or criticize the writers from the past, we don't consider the tradition. We don't consider that from which tradition and what other traditions from the past contributed in developing or in constructing the works of that writers. So we don't consider the tradition. We don't consider the past. And also, when we appreciate our present writers, we do the same. We don't take the past writers, past tradition into our consideration, and then accordingly, we don't compare our contemporary writers with those pastness, on the basis of those tradition. We don't do that. So this is the, you can say that the problem of English criticism, according to T.S. Eliot. The critical activity guides the creativity, guides the creative activity, just as the creative genius of each nation possesses some distinguishing traits, certain aptitudes and inclinations, being the expression of that nation's life. In the same way, each nation, each race has certain distinguishing habits of mind reflected in critical activity. So you see here, he's saying that the critical activity gives the creative activity. So if you become critical, then also it will create something creative. So we need to be critical to be creative. So just as the creative genius of each nation possesses some distinguishing traits, certain aptitudes, and inclinations being the expression of that nation's life. So you see, every nation has their own aptitude, and all the creative genius, they will focus or they will manifest certain aptitudes and traits of that particular nation. For example, I'm from Bangladesh. So from this nation, if I write, you will find that in my writing, you can find the tradition, you can find the reflection of my tradition in my writing. So in the same way, each nation, each race has certain distribution habits of mind reflected in critical activity. So similarly, as it is found in the creative genius and in their work, similarly in the critical activity, that means what actually critical activity means as T.S. Eliot is criticizing the work. So he's saying that even in the critical activity, we can also find the same. The influence of tradition also will be found there. And just as it is not easy for a nation to acquire a self-awareness of the defects and limitations of its creative habits of mind, in the same way it is difficult for a nation to cultivate a consciousness of the shortcomings of its critical habits of mind. So it says that it is not easy for a nation to self-awareness of defects and limitations. That means a nation cannot automatically have some idea of its defects and limitations of its own creative habits of mind. Even as a nation, you cannot identify your problems or limitations as easily. In the same way, a nation, it is difficult for a nation to cultivate a consciousness of the shortcomings of critical habits of mind. So you cannot, automatically, you cannot have this awareness of your limitations as a nation. At the same time, you cannot cultivate a kind of consciousness of your shortcomings or of your limitations in the critical habits of mind. That means for that, actually, you have to depend on your past tradition. You have to know your tradition. Now, again, he goes further. He's saying that, according to T.S. Eliot, that English nation, in Eliot's opinion, suffers from a similar unawareness of the shortcoming and limitation of its critical genius. Now, he's blaming the English tradition of criticism. He's saying that English, this tradition of criticism, they are also unaware of the shortcoming and limitations of each or of their critical genius. Critical genius means he's talking about writers. So we are not aware of the shortcomings or limitations of our writers, of our critical geniuses. The English are familiar with the critical writing in French often leads an Englishman to believe that the French people are more critical and consequently less spontaneous. Eliot strives to dispel this fallacy by emphasizing the importance of criticism, which according to him is as indispensable to creative activity as breathing is to life. So you can see there is a prejudice among the English people that they think that the critical writing in French, when they read French writing, they think that French are more critical than the English people. Okay, so that's actually they're less spontaneous. They say, oh, they're very critical and they're less spontaneous. We're not that much critical, but we are spontaneous. So this is their belief, the English people. But Eliot actually, he is trying to dispel this. Dispel means he is trying to remove this fallacy from the mind of the British people. He's saying that by emphasizing the importance of criticism, which according to him is as indispensable to creative activity as breathing is to life. Here actually he's giving importance of the criticism. And he's saying that English people, they don't give emphasis on this criticism, literary criticism. This activity, they don't like it. They don't have any promise, or you can say they don't have a knack for this. But he's saying that it is very important because If you're not critical, and if you don't criticize the works of the critical geniuses, then what will happen that their flaws or their limitations will remain there in their writings, so they will not be able to correct themselves. So that's why it's as indispensable to creative activity as breathing is to life. So as breathing is important to life, similarly, the criticism of these critical, this practice of criticizing works, or cultivating this critical mentality, he's saying that it is also indispensable to creative activity. Because if you don't criticize a work on the basis of the past tradition, then the work will not improve. The writer will not get chance to improve himself. So he's here actually emphasizing on the critical activity. Okay, have you got it? What I've said so far?
Yes, sir.
So you see, he is just emphasizing on the critical activity, that we need to have this, what should I say? We should practice criticizing work, so that, for example, I'm a writer, and if you're a critic, so you will criticize my work, and then I'll find that what are the strengths and weaknesses in my writing, and if I agree with that, then I will try to improve, and I will try to remove the limitations that I have in my writing. And a critic will do that job. He will help the writer actually to find his mistakes, to find his flaws or fallacies. Okay, we don't have enough time. We are left with only 2 minutes, so less than 2 minutes. So I will leave these 2 minutes for your question, for your opinion, or anything that you would like to add in today's discussion. So do you have anything to
Sir,
say?
একটা কথা ছিল।
Yes, please.
Hello.
Yes,
স্যার হচ্ছে স্যার এর আগে যখন লেকচারগুলো আমরা দিয়েছিলাম, লেকচার রেকর্ড পাইছিলাম স্যার, এই লাস্ট 2 লেকচার রেকর্ড পাই নাই।
Last, actually, I think I had only one with you, I guess. On this thing, tradition and individual talent. And before that, I discussed the other text, that is the study of poetry, but I shared it. It's on your page. Didn't you see the video? I shared the link on the page. All the previous lectures.
Sir, I did not get it.
How about the other people?
Sir,
didn't you see the video?
With them.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's there on the page, right? The video link. It's available.
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's available there. So you can
Sorry,
go to
sir,
no problem. No problem. It's okay. I understand it. You just go to the page, and then you will find all the videos in there. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And still, if you have any problem on any of you, you can contact me anytime, or you can leave voice. On your messenger. So I can hear your problem, or you can type it. So in whatever means. And even if you want any extra session, just like this, besides these fixed lectures, still we can have extra sessions at your convenient time. And in that session, I will try to use Bengali as well as English. So it will be a little bit formal and informal session. So you don't have to worry about it. So if you need that kind of session, just let me know. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Sir, we also need a Bengali lecture to understand very well.
Okay, so in that kind of informal way, informal lecture, so we can have it. So that will be fine. So you don't need to worry about it. Just let me know when you're free. Then we'll have another session, informal session with you, and we can discuss our points. Okay, thank you very much. We have less than 30 seconds. So I do